So I did a community post on this, but somebody suggested that I also do a video on this as well. And this is proof that works do not always automatically follow our faith. Paul tells the Christians in Rome that they had already been justified by faith. Okay, look at this. He says, therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. But even though they had already been justified by faith, he goes on in the very next chapter to warn them and exhort them that there was still something that they needed to do. In Romans 6:13, he says this, and do not present your members as instruments of unrighteousness to sin, but present yourselves to God as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God. So as we can see, this is something that they had to do. The responsibility is on them. They had to present their own members as instruments of righteousness to God. This wasn't going to just automatically happen for them. God wasn't just going to automatically do this for them. No, Paul doesn't say that. He says, no, you present your members as instruments of righteousness to God. And we know what members are because Jesus tells us exactly what members are. He says, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. And he refers to these body parts as members. Okay, so members are things like our feet, our hands, our eyes. We are to present our body parts, our members, as instruments of righteousness to God. And what would happen to us if we don't do this? Well, Paul goes on to explain this in verse 16. He tells us what would happen to us. He says, do you not know that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one slave whom you obey, whether of sin leading to death or of obedience leading to righteousness? So he tells us that this is going to result in death. And this is not talking about only physical death. This is talking about spiritual death. Well, how can I be so sure about that? Well, Jesus tells us in John 8:51, if we keep his word, we will not taste death or not see death. And Jesus is not talking about just physical death. The context of it is spiritual death. If anyone keeps his word, they will never see spiritual death or never taste spiritual death. So that's exactly what Paul is talking about here, that sin leads to spiritual death. If they don't present their members as instruments to righteousness, this will result in spiritual death. And we see in Revelation 14:12, it says, here is the patience of the saints. Some translations translate that as endurance. But it says, here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. See, it's not faith alone, guys. Yes, we have to keep the faith of Jesus. Yes, absolutely. But it says we also have to keep the commandments of God. And as I've already shown, this is not just going to automatically happen. No, we have to present our members as instruments of righteousness. And like Jesus said, we have to keep his word. If anyone keeps his word, he will not see spiritual death, will not see death. So this is our responsibility. Yes, we have to keep the faith of Jesus, but we also have to keep his word, or keep the commandments of God. His word includes the commandments of God. So it's both. It's not like we just get to pick one or the other. It's both. And what happens to us if we don't do this? If we don't present our members as slaves to righteousness, or if we don't keep his commandments? Well, again, this results in spiritual death. And this is after already being justified by faith. We still have to present our members as slaves to righteousness or keep the commandments of God.